What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So I'll be the first one to admit, when it comes to all new, all different Marvel, I can't say that I'm a fan of everything that's coming out of it. There are some stories that are lacking. There are some stories that I think could be a little bit better. Jeff Lemire's Old Man Logan is not one of those. Let me tell you guys something, man, this is insane. Jeff Lemire is writing one of the best Wolverine stories that I've ever read in the history of publications, and that says something because prior to the Death of Wolverine storyline, James Howlett had appeared in 12,000 comic books. That's insane, but this is just some of the best damn storytelling that I've ever seen. So when we initially covered volume 1 of Old Man Logan and All New, All Different Marvel, we had talked about how it really picked up with Logan just kind of being thrust into the post-Secret Wars environment, right? He's like Miles Morales. He's one of a handful of characters that was thrown into the recreated Earth 616 universe, but it actually hailed from an alternate reality. And so the idea was that he was trying to find his way. He was trying to figure out what was going on. He was trying to understand where he was, because in his mind, he believed that he had been thrown back into the past of his own timeline in order to basically keep the events of the original Old Man Logan story from happening, where he was tricked by Mysterio into killing the X-Men, the supervillains of the world took over Earth, and everything had fallen into absolute chaos. But what he had learned over the course of that story, by way of his interactions with Amadeus Cho, Incredible Hulk, with Kate Bishop, Hawkeye, with Old Man Steve Rogers, is that he was in a new reality. And in this Earth 616 timeline, the original Wolverine, James Howlett, had been killed after being encased in adamantium. And so from that point going forward, it was basically just Old Man Logan trying to find his way in the world. It was trying to find where he fit in. Now, of course, almost immediately after his arrival, he was discovered by the X-Men and they adopted him into their ranks. And they did this for a couple reasons. The first is because they needed a Wolverine, and the X-Men need Wolverine in a multitude of ways. I mean, you know, when it comes to metatextual content, in the sense that for us as readers, the X-Men aren't the X-Men if they don't have Wolverine. Wolverine is a mainstay of the team. But at the same time, it was also because Wolverine's a very handy person to have. You know, whether it's Old Man Logan or the original James Howlett, his sense of smell, his wrath, his ruthlessness, his ability to track down any enemy, his military training, his adamantium claws, his healing factor, there are so many aspects of him that are extremely useful for the team. And so because of this, they need him. And while he was inducted into the ranks of the X-Men, what Jeff Lemire does here with this Border Town, this 3-part story, is he does two things. The first is he says, Wolverine does not feel at home, you know, Old Man Logan does not feel at home with this X-Men team because it's not his X-Men team. In his mind, while they are alive here, in his home reality, he killed them all. And so he knows this is not his team, and he just doesn't feel that sense of comfort. But at the same time, what Jeff Lemire is doing is basically giving us a status quo with Old Man Logan and saying that, yes, Old Man Logan, you've been dropped into this new universe where the original Wolverine died, but no one else knows that. They know he's dead, but to their mind, Wolverine always comes back. He always comes back to life after people believe that he was dead. And so the idea is that for the various villains that we'll see, you know, I guess really for the only villains, for Lady Deathstrike and the Reavers, they're going to make their appearance because they believe that the original James Howlett has returned. Now, this is initially what Jeff Lemire says. You know, he simply has Wolverine meeting with Storm and saying, look, there's some things I have to sort out on my own. But what Lemire also does here is he teeters with the legacy of Wolverine. There have been stories where Wolverine and Storm have been lovers, whether it was an alternate reality, whether it was in the main Earth 616 continuity, whatever the case may be, there have been instances where Wolverine and Storm have fallen in love. And the indication here seems to be that Jeff Lemire is walking that line. He's saying that there is some measure of attraction between Storm and Wolverine, but Storm's allegiances are to the X-Men at the moment, because remember, you know, at this point, Cyclops is dead. There really is no leader of the X-Men with the exception of Storm herself. And so her goal is to rally what few mutants remain in the Marvel Universe to keep them safe from the effects of Terrigenesis, which will kill them, but to also bring the X-Men together in a way that works. And so it's very much like Charles Soule's run of Inhuman, following the detonation of the Terrigen bomb with all these Inhuman factions coming into existence, or us learning that they've been in existence for quite some time. You have Magneto's X-Men, you have, you know, the all new X-Men that are like college kids on a road trip, and then you have Storm's extraordinary X-Men. You've got all these different mutants around the Earth that Storm's trying to hold together, really with just a thread, with a, you know, with a hope and a wish. And so Wolverine taking off is basically him saying he's got to go do some things on his own. Now, what Lemire does, and this is one of the reasons why I love his writing of Old Man Logan at the moment, is he's basically giving us a lot of the backstory here. One of the questions people had when the original Old Man Logan story was written written by Mark Millar. One of the questions they had when Brian Michael Bendis wrote the Old Man Logan tie-in for Secret Wars, and one of the questions that they still had when Jeff Lemire took over the title is, how similar are the pasts of Old Man Logan and the main Marvel Universe Wolverine? How similar were their lives? Well, Jeff Lemire gives us this. He gives us a lot of the backstory here because this is uncharted waters. It's really just kind of out there and no one had ever really done anything with it before. All we knew was that in the youth of Wolverine, he'd been tricked into killing the X-Men, and that was really it. It was really just focusing on the moment in the Mark Millar Old Man Logan original story, and it was focusing on the events of Secret Wars during Bendis's 4-issue run during the main Secret Wars tie-in events. And so what we find out here is that after Wolverine had originally killed the X-Men, he had taken off to a location up in the Northwest Territories, basically a place called Killhorn Falls. Now, the reason why he left to go to Killhorn Falls is because this is where the original Weapon X facility was located. Now, Jeff Lemire is going to bounce back and forth between the past and the present, and he kind of blends the two together in the sense that we don't have one page that just says, back in the Old Man Logan universe. It's just really left by interpretation based on the color schemes, and that's something that I hope you guys notice. We get this kind of red/orange color scheme when we're looking at the past, and we get this, snowy white, theme when we're looking at the present. And it's really just kind of Wolverine reflecting on things. Of course, we know in the original Old Man Logan story that Wolverine had basically taken to a train, tried to kill himself after he had accidentally killed the X-Men. Of course, this didn't happen because of his adamantium skeleton, and so his neck couldn't be broken in the way that he had hoped. Instead, what he had done is he had basically kind of stumbled further into the woods. He buried his X-Men suit. He walked away from the Wolverine mantle, and then he eventually sought out the location of the Weapon X facility. I can't talk. But when he got there, he discovered that the building was occupied by refugees, by people who were basically fleeing from the cities as the world was being taken over by supervillains. Now again, this bounces back and forth, and so we actually kind of switch to the present for a moment, and we pick up with Old Man Logan feeding a stray wolf. Now while he's doing this, he runs into a young girl, and this young girl says, hey, you shouldn't feed strays. My mom said you shouldn't feed strays. That's how dogs keep coming back. Now again, what Jeff Lemire does, his writing style, this is what I like. His writing style is very much like a movie. With a lot of comic books, you usually get this sort of choppiness to writing style, so that makes any sense, where, if it were to translate into a motion picture, it would be stop motion. It would be a series of unrealistic, conversation pieces. But you can almost read this comic as if it were a show, where it's genuine, free-flowing conversation. And that's one of the reasons why Jeff Lemire is so good at writing comic books. Jesus, man. That's why he's so good at doing this stuff, because it feels legitimate. Like, it feels like an actual conversation. And so really, he makes a comment to this girl, is that how your mom got stuck with you? You were basically a stray that came along and she kept feeding you. Of course, it's a crappy thing to say, but Wolverine basically told us as we were picking up with this, as we were going through Killhorn Falls, that these people live a rough life. They live a hard life, but they live a life in isolation and really in a kind of state of peace away from everything else going on in the world. And that's one of the reasons why Wolverine sought this place out. He wanted to be in isolation because, whether it's Old Man Logan here or whether it is the original Wolverine that died, isolation was the key to his existence. He had spent so much time living alone, being a loner, that he doesn't really feel at home when he's in a city. He feels at home when he's out in the nature, when he's out in the woods, when he's out, among the various wildlife that exists out there, really when he's part of a wolf pack, which really speaks a lot of volumes to the nature of Wolverine in and of himself. But the fact remains here that jumping back to the past, after arriving at the former Weapon X facility and discovering that it's occupied by, by these refugees, while some of them immediately beat him up and questioning, that a woman arrives. And this woman says, hey, what's going on? Why are you doing this? She sticks up for Old Man Logan. And she says, what brought you here? Why would you venture this far out? And he said he's just looking for a place to rest, and when she asks what his name is, he says his name is James. And this conversation coincides exactly with the little girl. And so, Wolverine says his name is James, and the woman says her name is Maureen. And we basically learn this is Wolverine meeting the child version of the woman that he would eventually marry in the Old Man Logan storyline. And so for him, this is kind of a mixed situation because, again, with the Earth 616 universe proceeding as if the villains had never taken over the universe or taken over the planet, things are wildly different here. And so while Wolverine is introduced to their various, refugees in the past, or I guess in the Old Man Logan universe, while he's introduced to the people who are making their way, this is basically Jeff Lemire setting the stage and saying, this is how Wolverine met his wife in the Old Man Logan universe. This is how the two of them came into contact. They were part of a refugee camp in the early days of the villains taking over Earth. Most likely, things got so extreme that eventually this camp was overrun, and they just basically made their way, in the Southwest United States under the rule of the Incredible Hulk. And so because of this fact, because Logan basically says that they're two distinctly different people, this younger, this little girl who was the child version of the woman that he would eventually marry, because this world is totally different, this reality is isolated, of course he's not going to marry this girl. She's not going to grow up to become the woman that he will marry, but instead he looks at her as kind of a surrogate daughter in the sense that, she is someone that he can keep safe to make sure that she never experiences the same kind of experiences that her adult counterpart experienced in the Old Man Logan universe. But we also learn here that people are looking after Wolverine, people are hunting for him, and the people that have found him are basically Lady Deathstrike and the Reavers. Now, to sidetrack from this story for a second, the Reavers they have a very lengthy history in Marvel Comics, but they're usually synonymous with the X-Men and the Hellfire Club. And the reason why is because the Reavers were basically they were created and funded by the Hellfire Club, specifically under the direction of Donald Pierce, but they had always been enemies of the X-Men just by virtue of being associated with the Hellfire Club. But Lady Deathstrike, having been the daughter of one of the scientists that was killed by Wolverine, had ultimately reviewed him as her arch enemy. And as a result, the two of them had just gone back and forth over the course of their publication history. Now, with her original creation, this was just designed to bolster the landscape of Wolverine. Back when she was originally made, it was just a way to kind of add to the existing roster, but to also delve into the past of Wolverine, because way back in the 1990s and 1980s, James Howlett's entire history was a mystery. No one really knew anything about him. It wasn't until we got the Weapon X limited series that we actually learned about his entire time as part of Weapon X. But even before that, it was, or even after that, it was still a bit mysterious. And so intermittently, Marvel would inject these little pieces of backstory here and there to basically maintain interest in his character, because fans would always grab the comic believing that they were going to get this sort of all-encompassing origin story, this whole backstory of Wolverine, although they would only get bits and pieces. But it added to the allure of his character because he was this sort of devil-may-care kind of anti-hero in Marvel Comics, and people loved that element about him. He was just as much of a hero as he was a villain. And so because of this, Yuriko being this villain that was recurring in his own stories created a sort of dichotomy between the fact that he's trying to do good, but also dealing with the consequences of his own actions, and that the ghosts from his past were coming back to haunt him. And so with this particular story, we of course pick up with Wolverine waking up the next morning, and he is met with, the young girl Maureen, as well as her mom. And what had happened is their dog had gone missing. Now, of course, we know the Reavers killed that dog, but Logan, or Old Man Logan, says, hey, look, I'll try to find it. I'll hunt it down as best I can. Now, with his power to pick up scents, something to point out here is that Old Man Logan is not nearly as capable as his younger self, but this is offset by the fact that he has experience. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people have the debate on who's better, the original Wolverine or Old Man Logan. Old Man Logan didn't pop his claws for 30 years, but in terms of his experiences, in terms of his ability to fight, in terms of the wisdom that he's gained over the course of his life, there's an argument to be made here that he's better than his younger counterpart. But at the same time, the younger version of Wolverine is faster, more agile, more capable, not really smarter, but able to pick up scents for a longer duration, and that's the case that's kind of being made here, is the abilities of Old Man Logan have eroded. But the reason why this is so good is because it's basically like a tamed down version of Wolverine. It's almost like those of you guys who are reading Superman Truth in DC Comics, that was one of the best Superman stories written because it was a toned down version of Superman. It was a Superman that could be killed. With this version of Wolverine, he's still a very capable character, but he's not as capable as his younger self. And so after picking up the scent of this dog, he also picks up the scent of gasoline and oil, and comes to the realization that people are hunting for him. And so once he hears gunfire back in the town, he arrives and he finds that Bonebreaker of the Reavers is killing people in this little village. Now, of course, he's able to fight through Bonebreaker, he's able to deal with him, but this is Jeff Lemire basically telling us that with the various supervillains out there not knowing that this is Wolverine from a different universe, in their eyes, the Logan that died after being encased in adamantium has somehow come back, and he's older now. And so this is really Lemire stating, this is what's going to be happening in the solo series of Wolverine. From this point going forward, or at least it seems to be the case from this point going forward, it's going to be this sort of, tour of the various villains that Wolverine has faced and the various conflicts he's going to have with them. Now, if I were to wager a guess here, I would say this is probably Jeff Lemire experimenting, because Wolverine has a lot of different villains throughout his publication history. He has a lot of different people that he's fought against. And the idea here is to test the waters to see which villains people are most receptive to, and then to make those villains recurring characters. It may also be that Jeff Lemire is just writing this for the sake of giving it it to us and writing a damn good story at the same time. But in any event, after saving, some of these villagers and having them go back to the quarry, Wolverine's also made aware of the fact that the children are still at school. And so the goal is to get back to the school to save their lives from these reavers and to get them back to safety. But once he gets there, of course, he finds one of the reavers is already in the process of attacking these children. And of course, he kills the reaver before anything happens to them and tries to get them on their way. After which, once they start to leave the facility, they discover that another reaver has taken a child hostage and is threatening to kill this child if Wolverine doesn't hand himself over. Now, following this, Jeff Lemire gives us this incredible monologue in the mind of Old Man Logan. And this is why this is so cool, because Old Man Logan has so much character. That was one of the big drawbacks of the original Wolverine. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a comic book fan that would disagree with this. But that was one of the big drawbacks with the original Wolverine is, yes, he had character under the writing of Chris Claremont, but once Claremont left, Wolverine just kind of became this blunt instrument. He would show up in a conflict, he would attack some people with his claws, and then he would go away. Like he was just this non-thinking killing machine. And in fact, during Civil War, there was a comment made by Tony Stark where he said that, like, do you even know why you're doing what you're doing? And Wolverine just says, well, because it's just what I do. I just go and I attack people, I kill people. Sure, it was, the writer at the time being a little cynical, but the idea here is that was what Wolverine was in Marvel Comics. That's one of the reasons why people weren't too sad to see him go, because they were tired of seeing this mindless killing machine just cutting a swath through villains in the Marvel Universe. They wanted character. When it comes down to comic book guys, that's what fans want. Fans want good storytelling. They don't really care who writes it. They don't really care what the story's about. They just want good storytelling. And that's why Jeff Lemire, I think, is pivotal to the run of Old Man Logan right now, because he's telling such a good story. But what he says here is that in the mind of Old Man Logan, his life is chaos. Not in the sense that it's disheveled and things are everywhere, but in the sense that chaos follows him everywhere he goes. Death and chaos. No matter what he does, no matter what life he crafts for himself, no matter where he goes in the world, death is always there to follow him. Whether it was in the original Old Man Logan universe when he first fought the Incredible Hulk, whether it was because, when he became a samurai, whether it was when he killed the X-Men after being tricked, when he learned that his family was killed by the Incredible Hulk family in the Old Man Logan universe, his life is nothing more than just chaos and absolute destruction. And so what Lemire does is he has Wolverine basically give in to this chaos. He has Old Man Logan give into it. Now, this is a huge deal for the Old Man Logan character, and the reason why is because when Mark Millar originally wrote the story, the big emphasis on Logan was that he wouldn't pop his claws, he didn't want to become a mindless beast again, he wanted to live a life of peace, but it was that he was constantly being pushed, he was constantly being sent to the edge, he was constantly being made to become this mindless monster, but he always found his way back. It was always just on the tip of the ledge. It was always walking the knife's edge and almost falling over. It was always him almost becoming this insane, ravenous monster that was going to start tearing through everything, but he always brought himself back. But during this entire conflict with the reavers, he comes to this realization that if death is always going to follow him, if there are always going to be villains out there, whether they're his original villains or whether they're villains of the Wolverine that existed and died after being encased in adamantium and think that Old Man Logan is that Wolverine, regardless of the case, they are going to come after him no matter where he goes. That no matter who he talks to, the people that he tries to help, those that he tries to save, those villains are always going to hunt him down. And so in his mind, the only way to stop this is to attack them first. Now he comes to this realization as he's fighting Yuriko. Once she makes her presence known and she puts him in a situation where he has to choose between Maureen or her mother, that one of the, the sheriff of the town basically takes a shot and injures Lady Deathstrike. And in her momentary distraction, the mother and the daughter make their escape, and Wolverine just starts tearing into Yuriko. And he's just giving us this great monologue and saying that this is who he is, that he has become chaos, that Wolverine has become death, the destroyer of worlds, and he's going to destroy every single villain that he comes across. And that is why this is so cool, because it's finally Old Man Logan saying, okay, look, I cannot hide. I cannot stay hidden from the world. I cannot experience a life of peace. And so this is basically Jeff Lemire giving us this crazy, ravenous, no holds barred, let's see what happens, let's give us this Wrath of Wolverine character with the wisdom and the character development that came along with Old Man Logan. And because of this, he rips Lady Deathstrike apart. He cuts her legs off, he cuts her arms off, and she just kind of crawls her way to safety. And that's when he basically just says, this is what it's going to be now. No matter where I go, people are going to suffer so long as I'm alive. If I am chaos, then I will bring that chaos to all those that would try to hunt me down. So with that being said, guys, God, Jeff Lemire, man. Dude, I love your writing. Jesus, Jeff Lemire is amazing when it comes to writing Wolverine stories. If you guys have not picked up Old Man Logan, you really need to read this because it's one of the best damn things coming out of Marvel right now. God, man, like, woe betide us if Jeff Lemire leaves Marvel and goes over to DC or something like that. Like, that would be so disappointing. But yeah, guys, if you're new here to Comics Explained, be sure to hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like and leave a comment down below, because I'm kind of curious. Leave a comment down below. Who do you think is better? The old Wolverine who died after being encased in adamantium, or I guess this Old Man Logan as he exists right now? Like, let me know, like, which, not in terms of like fighting abilities, but in terms of like storytelling, which one do you think is better? And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.